This is Chapter 5 of your phlebotomy program concerning issues with safety measures and care team members and patients. So, objective number 1 is to discuss the importance of laboratory safety and identify OSHA's categories of common hazards. Workplace hazards may vary, but all healthcare settings can pose dangers to workers and patients alike. All staff members, including phlebotomy technicians, are responsible for safety in a facility. Recognizing and working to reduce risks will result in fewer accidents and a safer environment for everyone. OSHA identifies the following 4 categories of hazards in a laboratory environment: chemical, biological, physical, and safety. Chemicals used in some areas of a diagnostic laboratory may create dangerous fumes. They may also be caustic, damaging to the skin or other tissues, or flammable, which means they're able to catch fire easily. Bloodborne pathogens are one significant biological hazard phlebotomists may encounter. Disease-causing bacteria, viruses, and fungi spread through the air by droplets or through direct contact are also biological hazards. Ergonomics is the science of designing equipment, areas, and work tasks to make them safer and to suit workers' abilities. Physical hazards include poor ergonomic practices. They also include exposure to radiation and/or excessive noise. And finally, general safety hazards include electrical hazards, fire, burns from hot equipment, tripping, slipping, and falling. Disaster situations can also create safety hazards. Phlebotomists encounter all of these types of hazards on the job. Working with sharps and blood in the central daily task of the phlebotomist, which means exposure to biological hazards, is a constant concern. Though most blood collection tubes are now made of plastic rather than glass, if tubes break or spill, there's a risk of exposure of potentially contaminated blood. Phlebotomists may also work with equipment that could pose risk of burns or electrical shock. They may work with harmful chemicals, including products used to disinfect surfaces or clean up spills. Every workplace will also have its own ergonomic challenges. Factors like the height and adjustability of drawing chairs, the location of sharps containers and supply storage, and the amount of space available at a drawing station can all affect safety. Fires are a concern in any healthcare setting, but laboratories that use flammable chemicals are particularly at risk. Patients entering a healthcare facility must be protected from harm as much as possible. Phlebotomists should always be aware of physical dangers such as uneven walkways or accidental exposures to heat, and the dangers from electrical, biological, or chemical hazards. Emergencies such as natural disasters or even active shooter situations also pose danger. Workers must know how to best protect their patients and themselves from these risks. OSHA emphasizes the importance of preparedness in dealing with safety hazards. All healthcare facilities have policies and procedures in place for responding to hazards and provide training on this topic at least once a year. Planning alone, however, is not enough. Training drills for fire evacuation and disaster response should be conducted regularly. Healthcare workers should review and practice safety responses so that they become automatic. The Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970 established the requirement for employers to provide a safe, hazard-free workplace in healthcare settings. Certain potential hazards are unavoidable, but employers are required to manage these hazards as effectively as possible. This may be achieved in a variety of ways. Engineering controls. These controls prevent workers from coming into contact with hazards. Examples would be retractable needles and automated lancets. Administrative controls. These are policies and procedures set by employers that limit possible dangers. Developing standard operating procedures for handling blood and body fluids is an example. Work practices. These are changes to how work is done that limit exposure to hazards, using the least caustic antimicrobial agent available for cleaning laboratory surfaces as long as it's still effective, for an example. And PPE, personal protective equipment, is essential when contact with hazards is likely. Wearing gloves when a worker might touch something contaminated with the blood or body fluid is a perfect example. To supplement the general protections outlined in the OSH Act, OSHA developed specific regulations related to work in particular fields. Regulations that are particularly important for phlebotomists include Bloodborne Pathogen Standard and its amendment, the Needle Stick Safety and Prevention Act, the Personal Protective Equipment Standard, and the Hazard Communication Standard. Chapter 4 describes the Bloodborne Pathogen Standard, the Needle Stick Safety and Prevention Act in detail. The Hazard Communication Standard is sometimes called to as the HAZCOM, addresses the identification of potential hazards in the workplace. A series of pictograms must be used to identify hazards, and further information must be available regarding the chemical products in use. These chemicals must be clearly labeled, and all possible hazards must be clearly communicated in a document called the Safety Data Sheet, or SDS, formerly called Material Safety Data Sheet, or MSDS. Employers must train healthcare workers about the possible dangers of these chemicals and about measures they can take to protect themselves from harm. The safety data sheet details the chemical ingredients, chemical dangers, and safe handling, storage, and disposal procedures for a product. Information about emergency response actions to be taken should also be included. Some facilities use a toll-free number to access SDS information. These sheets must be available in work areas for all employees. Important information about the SDS includes the following. Employers must have an SDS for every chemical used. Employers must provide easy access to the SDS. Staff members must know where these sheets are kept and how to read them. They should also ask for help if they do not know how to do this. Remember, employees must always know where SDS sheets are kept and how to use them. This goes hand in hand with OSHA's You Have a Right to Know policy. OSHA requires that emergency eye wash stations be placed at all hazardous areas in case of an eye injury. Employees must know where to get to the closest eye wash station and how to get there with restricted vision. Two terms you should be familiar with before continuing in this chapter are aerosolized and centrifuge. The term aerosolized refers to dispersing a substance through the air in such a way in which it might be inhaled. A common way that might be happening is if a centrifuge machine is improperly secured. A centrifuge is a machine commonly used to separate substances within liquids through rapid spinning, most commonly for our purposes, components of blood. So remember, a culture of safety means speaking up about possible hazards and sharing ideas for minimizing or avoiding them. The best way to avoid dangerous situations in the workplace is to develop what the CDC calls a culture of safety. This means the healthcare facilities policy emphasizes safety and identify and addresses potential hazards. Healthcare workers are encouraged to speak up about possible hazards and share their ideas for avoiding them. When hazardous situations do occur, it is important for phlebotomists to know how best to respond. Chemical exposures may result in harm to the skin, eyes, or mucous membranes. It can also cause breathing difficulties and a wide variety of other symptoms depending upon the specific chemical involved. Phlebotomists work with antiseptics, which are used to reduce the number of pathogens in the body, and with disinfectants, which are used to reduce the number of pathogens on environmental surfaces. Some disinfectants can be quite damaging if spilled or used improperly. That's why it's important for phlebotomists to understand how and where to access the safety data sheets. Some following guidelines should always be adhered to when dealing with chemical hazards. For one, do not use any chemical agents you are not trained or permitted to use. Wear appropriate gloves when using disinfectants as per facility policy, and change gloves if you're in contact with disinfectants for longer than 30 minutes. These chemicals can damage and break down gloves over time. Do not store food, drink in an area where hazardous chemicals are used or stored. Do not drink or eat anything in the workplace if you're not certain of its origin. Food and drink should be limited to break areas and never consumed in the laboratory or the drawing stations. Do not place pens, pencils in your mouth, apply makeup, or touch your face or eyes while working. Always know how to access SDS information, whether in physical form or by telephone. Know where eye wash stations, sinks, showers, and other safety facilities are located and the quickest route to reach them. In the case of exposure, flush with running water or wash the exposed area immediately. The length of time required for washing depends on how corrosive the chemical is. It can range from 5 minutes for mildly irritating chemicals to an hour to highly corrosive chemicals. The SDS should provide guidance on this topic. Report any known or suspected exposure to hazardous materials to your supervisor. Seek medical attention if needed, as directed by your supervisor. Chapter 4 included information about biological hazards and infection prevention. In addition to exposure to such hazards through accidental needle sticks or contact with an infected patient, phlebotomists may also be exposed to biological hazards through spills, leaking or broken specimen containers, or through the air during cleaning. This can happen when small particles of liquid or dried blood or body fluids are aerosolized, as we mentioned before, or dispersed through the air in such a way that they might be inhaled. Some safety guidelines for common hazards dealing with biological agents include sealing tubes up and other specimen containers properly to prevent leaks or spills. No part of the specimen should be on the outside of the container. Place specimens to be carried to another area of the facility in a rigid, latching container made of material capable of containing spills. In the event of a broken specimen container and/or spills, follow facility policy for cleaning. Notify your supervisor or the appropriate person or department. Don gloves before cleaning. Special heavy-duty gloves may be required. Do not pick up any pieces of broken glass, no matter how large, with your hands. Use a dustpan and broom or other tools. Absorb the spill in whatever product is used by the facility. Apply the proper disinfectant and follow instructions regarding the amount of time it must stand before cleaning. Non-sharp waste, such as tissue, gauze, clothes, etc., containing blood or body fluid should be properly bagged in a special biohazard waste bag. Anything that could pierce a biohazard bag, such as broken glass, must be placed in a puncture-proof sharps container. Follow facility policy. Never scrape dried blood or other body fluids off a surface or floor. The dried material can become aerosolized and then inhaled. Follow facility policy for cleaning dried blood and body fluids, soaking the dried materials in an antimicrobial cleaner for the required length of time. A centrifuge is a machine commonly used to separate substances in blood and other specimens through rapid spinning. Improper use of a centrifuge can result in broken collection tubes and exposure to biological hazards. Never use equipment you have not been specifically trained to use, and always follow procedures exactly. The majority of accidental exposures to biological hazards involving a centrifuge are usually due to user error. Discard and reprint a paper requisition form or other paper document if it becomes wet, soiled, or potentially contaminated with blood or body fluids. In the case of exposure to blood or body fluids, such as an accidental needle stick, wash or flush the area immediately with soap and water for 15 minutes, report the exposure, and get immediate medical attention. Phlebotomists may also encounter physical hazards in their workspaces. Poor ergonomic practices can cause injury. Exposure to X-rays or radioactive chemicals used in some medical tests or treatments is a potential hazard. Specimens from patients who have received certain treatments or tests may also have low levels of radioactivity. Noise from machinery can also be a danger if it's above a certain level. Follow the guidelines for dealing with physical hazards. 1. Pay attention to ergonomics. There should be room at workstations to do your job without bumping into equipment or other workers. The sharps container should be within arm's reach. You should be able to access the patient's arm or other collection site without stooping or bending. Supplies should be easy to reach. If this is not the case, talk to a supervisor about possible changes. Standard precautions are adequate to protect against exposure to low-level radiation that might be present in patient samples. Wear gloves when handling any specimen containers. Pay attention to signs, lights, and other warnings about X-ray and other radiation exposure. Do not enter an area in which X-rays or radioactive substances are used without following the required precautions. Follow facility policies about tracking radiation exposure. If you frequently work in areas where radiation is common, you'll need to wear a dosimeter. This is a small clip-on badge capable of measuring radiation exposure. It must be turned in after a certain amount of time to make sure exposure levels are acceptable. Use ear protections when working with noisy machines or entering rooms in which loud machines are operating, following facility policy. Safety hazards can range from a loose floor mat to a fire or explosion. Natural disasters also pose safety hazards of their own. As to human-made disasters like acts of terrorism or active shooter situation, the following are general guidelines for a variety of potential safety hazards. Make sure walkways are dry and free of clutter, cords, and other tripping hazards. Floor mats should have non-slip backing and should not be uneven or have loose edges. Wear non-skid, closed-toe shoes and keep shoelaces tied. Uneven flooring or stairs should be marked with tape or a contrasting color to indicate a hazard. Always close drawers in cabinets immediately after their use. Many phlebotomists work near electrical equipment, some of which can produce dangerous levels of heat. Damaged or improperly used electrical equipment can cause injuries or fires. Phlebotomists should never use equipment they have not been trained and assigned to use. And below are some following guidelines to avoid electrical or burn hazards. Immediately report frayed electrical cords or electrical equipment that looks unsafe. Do not use this equipment. Report it to a supervisor. Do not put combustible, or ability to burn, material near any appliance or machine that generates heat. Do not touch the surface of any appliance or machine in operation if it might be hot, for example an autoclave. Do not overload electrical sockets. Report overloaded sockets if you see them. Do not use extension cords or two-prong electrical plugs. Two-prong plugs do not protect against electrical surges. Report damaged or malfunctioning equipment to a supervisor or to the appropriate personnel right away. Remember, fires are a risk in any healthcare facility. Laboratories can be especially dangerous in a fire because chemicals and heat-generating equipment are often present. All facilities must have a fire safety plan, and all workers need to know this plan. Guidelines regarding fire and evacuations are explained to all employees. Evacuation routes are posted in facilities. Phlebotomists should read and review them often and should attend fire and disaster response training when they are offered. Please remember these following guidelines for responding to fires. Fire alarms and exit doors should not be blocked. If they are, report this to a supervisor. Know the facility's fire evacuation plan. Stay calm. Do not panic. Every facility will have multiple fire extinguishers. Learn where they are located. Try to remember the PASS acronym that will help you understand how to use an extinguisher. P. Pull the pin. A. Aim at the base of the fire when spraying. S. Squeeze the handle. S. Sweep back and forth at the base of the fire. In case of a fire, you can also use the RACE acronym. It's a good rule to follow. R. Remove anyone in danger if you yourself are not in danger. A. Activate alarm or call 911. C. Contain the fire if possible by closing all doors and windows. Some modern facilities do this automatically. E. Extinguish the fire or the fire department will extinguish it. Evacuate the area if instructed to do so. Follow the directions of the fire department. Do not get into an elevator during a fire unless directed to do so by a firefighter. Stay low in a room to escape a fire. Remember, smoke and heat and hot air rises to the top, so there's room to live at the bottom. If the door of a room you're in is closed, check for heat coming from it before opening it. If the door or doorknob feels hot, stay in the room if there is no safe exit. Plug the doorway with wet towels or clothing if available to prevent smoke from entering. Stay in the room until help arrives. Use the stop, drop, and roll fire safety technique to extinguish a fire on clothing or hair. Stop running or stay still. Drop to the ground, lying down if possible. Roll on the ground to try to extinguish the flames. Use a damp covering over the mouth and nose to reduce smoke inhalation. After leaving the building, move away from it as quickly as possible. So there are many types of disasters, from tornadoes to power outages to hurricanes, earthquakes, terrorist situations, active shooters. It's beyond a little bit of scope of this practice to go into each and every scenario. However, some general guidelines in responding to disasters include: 1. Remain calm. Know the location of all exits and stairways. Know where the fire alarms and extinguishers are located. Know the appropriate action to take in a variety of situations based on facility training. Use the internet to stay informed or keep the radio or television tuned into local station to get the latest information. Many of the same safety precautions described in this chapter apply to both patients and healthcare workers. Following the guidelines listed in the previous learning objectives will protect patients, visitors, and members of the healthcare team. In addition, phlebotomists must always be aware of specific patient needs. Phlebotomists can work to anticipate and prevent possible problems that could pose dangers to patients. Listening to patients is an important step in keeping them safe. If the patient reports feeling lightheaded or faint, for instance, the phlebotomist should respond immediately. Details for responding to fainting during a blood draw are found in Chapter 9, but if a patient reports these sensations before they are even seated, she should be assisted to sit down immediately. Fainting from a standing position poses a greater risk of injury, and sitting down might relieve the sensation. In many cases, acting quickly to address patient concerns can prevent dangerous outcomes. Pediatric and elderly patients are especially vulnerable to physical harm in healthcare facilities. When children are in a phlebotomy drawing station, the phlebotomist should take extra precautionary steps to protect the safety of that child as well as himself. Some guidelines include 1. Introduce yourself. Lower yourself to address the patient at eye level. Make sure that he or she understands that you talk to them if they're anxious or scared. This may create an atmosphere of trust, and the child may be more likely to speak up if they're hurt. Make sure potentially dangerous supplies are out of the child's reach. Make sure the sharps receptacle is within arm's reach for the phlebotomist, but not within easy reach of the child. Do not leave a child at a drawing station unattended, even for a short period of time. If equipment in a drawing station is not made for pediatric patients, make sure the patient is in the parent or guardian's lap or safely sitting in a comfortable position. Make sure that you can easily access the site where you will perform the blood draw. If the patient is an infant, ensure that she cannot roll or fall off the facility equipment. Remember, pediatric patients have rights just as any other patient does. Children's voices should be heard and valued, and their concerns should be addressed. Elderly patients require special precautions as well. They may have reduced sense of vision or hearing, or may be less steady on their feet. Canes or walkers may make maneuvering in small areas more challenging. Elderly patients have more fragile bones, more delicate skin, and may be injured more easily than younger patients. So some guidelines when dealing with geriatric patients include 1. Be sure the patient has a clear path to the drawing station. Take care to point out any uneven pathways or walkways or steps or stairs along the patient's path. The patient uses an aid such as a cane or a walker so that she can reach the chair without difficulty. Assisting is needed. Store the cane or walker in a location that will not interfere with your access to the patient. Follow the communication guidelines that was covered in Chapter 3 to ensure proper and clear communication. And take care in handling an elderly patient's limbs and be gentle with their skin. And that's the end of Chapter 5 as far as health and safety in the workplace. Until next time.